Peace World, and welcome to Foundation Radio. My name is Adam Barnard. Thank you so much for joining me today. My guest on the program is an entrepreneur, a fundraiser, the creator of the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, and the author of The Man Who Made Mark Twain Famous, which is currently now available, re-released in paperback. Cappy McGarr, sir, how are you? Thank you so much for joining me today.
Adam, thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
I appreciate your time. And I wanted to start at the top of the show here. I read through the book. It's a fantastic read. I want to thank you for letting me dive into it. One of the things that I really connected with right off the bat, though, as my social media handles are This Is Goober, the story about your character of Goober Hoedecker. And then you prank called the White House. Tell me more about that process. Like, were you concerned prank calling Richard Nixon at that time? Tell me about how that came to be.
Well, I earned my way through school. I was getting an undergraduate degree and then finally a graduate degree. And a friend of mine, I did voices and impressions. And back then, you could do voices and impressions and not get permission without paying the famous person any money. Woody Allen had a suit that went all the way to the Supreme Court, by the way, when somebody was impersonating him on television, and he won. And so therefore, from that time on, if you did an impression of someone, you really had to pay their estate or that person, had to make do an agreement with them. So I did a Jimmy Stewart impression. This guy said, this friend of mine, who was a fraternity brother, they had a fundraiser at actually they called it the Crippled Children's Hospital in Austin. They've obviously changed that name. But they wanted me to do a Jimmy Stewart impression. And I said, sure. So I did Jimmy Stewart saying, well, the Silver Spurs are raising a lot of money for a really worthy cause. And it was a PSA, and it went on every single radio station in Austin. And this guy named David Jarrett, who had he was a disc jockey at the primetime 6 to 9 slot at KNOW in Austin. He called me out of the blue and he said, listen, I'd like for you to do some promos for me and I'll pay you for it. And I said, okay, sure. I'm happy to hear myself talk and get paid for it. And so I went and did about, 4 or 5 impressions for him. And then afterwards, we were having a cup of coffee. He said, listen, would you like to be a sidekick? For me in the morning, 6 to 9. I said, well, I got school. He goes, why don't you come in 3 or 4 times a week and we can pre-record it and we'll put it on the air. And so it was literally ad libs. We came up with a character named Goober Hoedecker. Dolph Briscoe was the governor of Texas, and he closed the whorehouse down in LaGrange, Texas, and there's a movie about it, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And so Goober Hoedecker, I took my Lyndon Johnson impression and made it very, very country. And Goober talked like this. And, Mr. Carrot, I always mispronounce everyone's name. He said, no, it's Jarrett. I said, well, if you wouldn't wear that funny green wig, maybe I wouldn't call you Mr. Carrot. Of course, he didn't have a green wig. And so I had a horny toad ranch, Texas. And, oh, boy, when it's mating season, those critters go crazy. So that was the start of Goober Hoedecker. And so we played pranks. I ran for mayor of Austin. Actually, I was working for a city council member, so I knew all the mayor of the city council. But when Richard Nixon's issues and problems came up, I said to Dave Jarrett, I said, hey, let's let Goober be a newsman for once in his life and call the White House and try to get Ron Nesson, who was the press secretary, for Richard Nixon on the phone. And so we called the White House and said, this is Goober Hoedecker, KNOW newsroom, and would like to have a brief conversation with Ron Nesson. And they said, who is this? And I went, well, Goober Hoedecker from KNOW, Austin, Texas. We got the prime time, 6 to 9, and we want to talk to Mr. Nesson. We actually get him on the phone. He says, hello, Mr. Hoedecker? I went, yes, Mr. Nesson. Now, is Nixon going to resign or what? He said, who is this? He said, first of all, it's President Nixon or something to that effect. It's been so long ago. I think we have a recording of it somewhere.
I would love to hear that.
Anyway, about 3 or 4 sentences later, he said, I've got to go, and hangs up. Of course, we put it on the air. Nixon resigned, actually, I think the next day. So it was it was just a happenstance, funny kind of bit. But anyway, that's the story of Goober Hoedecker.
Listen, now I feel like I should credit Goober Hoedecker for kind of starting the wheel there with Nixon's resignation, but I feel like he has his place in American history. But I want to go back a little bit to talk about your time working for LBJ. You worked with him in a certain capacity. Tell me about how that started and how that impacted your career going forward.
That's a great question, and it was a very special moment for me. I was getting my undergraduate degree in journalism, and I had to take in government, a Bachelor of Arts in Government, and I had to take 3 hours of government in order to graduate because I was putting it off. And there was only one course available for me the last semester, and it was Elsbeth Rostow, who was married to Walt Rostow, one of the national security advisors to President Johnson. Anyway, she was very close with President Johnson, and she had an incredible background herself. But no respecting fraternity guy went to class NWF at 9 o'clock.
Of course.
This just didn't happen.
Of course. I mean, that's the same at Westchester University. No self-respecting 91.7 WCUR DJ ever showed up to a class at 9 o'clock. We were there at 10:15, and you were welcomed for the privilege.
So the night before, we were doing shuffleboard, drinking beer. So no respecting fraternity guy went to a class at 9 o'clock. Anyway, Elsbeth Rostow called The Conflict Between Domestic and Diplomatic Priorities in Presidential Elections. And my eyes kind of, rolled over. I said, okay, well, this is my only shot to graduate with my BA in government. So I went there at 9 o'clock, went to the back of the class, and it just was I cannot believe I'm going to be so bored with this class. And Elsbeth Rostow walked in. She was a beautiful, really handsome woman with a gold pennant on her, on the left-hand side of her. She wore it actually every single day on her blouse.
Wow.
Or her suit. And she opened her mouth, and she just was so spectacularly mesmerizing. I never missed a class, got on the front row. She became my faculty advisor. And I could take 3 hours of any subject that I wanted. And I went to her and I said, listen, I'd like to study Lyndon Johnson. And at that time, he was obviously still alive. And she said, fine, I'll do that. I'll sponsor you. And so she gave me 18 books to read, the good books, the bad books, Evans and Novak, Exercise in Power. But I read through all of them. And I kept asking her, what would my final exam be? She said, well, I'm thinking about it. Don't worry. She said, you may write a paper. I may give you a test or whatever. So at the end of the semester, I get a call from Bill Wright, who was President Johnson's chief of staff. I actually knew Bill because we were delegates to when 18-year-olds got the right to vote. Mm-hmm. They had 2 delegates from every state go to Washington for a conference. And Bill and I were appointed to go to that conference. And so I kind of knew Bill. Bill said, listen, tomorrow morning, put your only suit on. And I only had one suit. And he said, Harry Middleton, who is the director of the LBJ Library, wants to meet with you. I said, okay, why? He said, well, you'll find out. So I went to the LBJ Library, walked in the office, and Harry Middleton was there, Bill Wright, and Elsbeth Rostow was there. And Harry Middleton said, Cappy would like for you to be President Johnson's aide during the Civil Rights Symposium. I understand you've been studying the president under Ms. Rostow all semester. And we thought that, this might be a good way to close out your study on President Johnson. He said, and by the way, I know you've been asking Mrs. Rostow about what grade you're going to get. President Johnson's going to grade you, and he's a very tough grader.
Oh, God.
I said, well, I got very excited. I said, well, what do I do? He goes, well, if Mrs. Johnson wants a cup of coffee, go get a cup of coffee. If the president wants his speech, go get the speech. I said, you mean a gopher? He said, no, you're going to be his aide. I went, oh, okay.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So the Civil Rights Symposium, I was his aide to President Mrs. Johnson during the Civil Rights Symposium. It was his last public appearance. He actually died about a month later in January of that year, of the next year. And everyone in the civil rights effort came to the LBJ Library. Andrew Young, Earl Warren gave the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court gave the keynote address. And it was an incredible moment. It was sleeting in Austin, and people could not fly into Austin because the weather was so bad. They had to fly into an Air Force base in San Antonio, and they bust them in. President Johnson was stuck on the LBJ ranch. Mrs. Johnson was at the LBJ library, and I was with her. And I remember so vividly Mrs. Johnson on the phone to the president, and his doctor actually was right by Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson said, "Do not come. It's too dangerous. People will understand. You've got angina." And the doctor, she gave the phone to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Mr. President, please do not come in. You do not need to, people will understand." Johnson wanted to take his helicopter and fly. They had a helicopter port on top of the LBJ library, and wanted to literally fly and land on the LBJ library in a grand fashion. Obviously, the weather was so bad that didn't happen. The FAA had finally said no helicopter pad on the LBJ library. This is well after Johnson had passed away. And now I think the staff uses it for sunbathing on the top of the LBJ library. But in any event, it was a very spectacular moment in my young life. I was 21-ish years old. And one of the great moments was that the last day, Earl Warren, former Chief Justice Earl Warren was giving the keynote, and a UPI photographer took a picture of President, Mrs. Johnson, and me, and it was almost every paper in the country. And the Houston Chronicle was the only one that wanted to identify me. It said President, Mrs. Johnson, and an unidentified aide. So there you go. I'm still unidentified, but I was asked to be on the LBJ Foundation board almost 30 years ago, and I've served on the LBJ Foundation for that period of time.
That's an incredible story, and I'm glad that we were able to finally identify that mystery aide here together on the show. We're making headlines, Cappy. I really appreciate that. So you work with LBJ, and you have this incredible, really impressive career, which leads you to an appointment by President Clinton in 1996 to the Kennedy Center. Tell me about that process, and then also kind of parlay into the creation of the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. Tell me a little bit more briefly.
Adam, that's a great question. I was very fortunate to know President Clinton when he was a governor. I did a bunch of fundraisers for him, and one of my very close friends in life, and still is Tom Daschle, who was a senator from South Dakota, and went on to become minority leader and majority leader of the Senate. And I created and chaired his PAC, for a long period of time while he was leader. But so I called my mother-in-law, Annette Strauss, who was the first Jewish mayor of Dallas, elected mayor of Dallas, was appointed by President Carter. My wife's uncle was Bob Strauss, and he was in the Carter administration, trade negotiator, ambassador. He was Middle East negotiator at one point, inflation czar. I mean, he had a long, storied history of public service. But he got the President Carter to appoint Annette Strauss on the board of the Kennedy Center. So Annette would take Janie and me, my wife and I, to the Kennedy Center, and it was wonderful. I mean, I remember one time. They had a black tie dinner the night before the Kennedy Center honors, and George Shultz was Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State always has a black tie dinner the night before. And obviously Ronald Reagan was president, so we sat at the Democratic table. It was President Annette when she was mayor, me, Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder. My dinner partner was Leontine Price, and her ex-husband Paul Warfield was there, famously sang Old Man River. Yep. And it was a wonderful thing, a wonderful occasion. George Shultz gets up and says, "We got a special treat. Leontine Price is going to begin the evening." And so Leontine gets up and she sings God Bless America. I mean, it was unbelievable. Wow. Tears around. I mean, she was incredible. She had this huge turban on that she always wore. And she sat down and she said, I said, Leontine, I'm such a big fan of yours. She said, "Oh, do you like the opera?" And I paused and I went, "No, ma'am, I really don't." She goes, "Then why are you such a big fan of mine?" I said, "Because you're a poor black woman that grew up in Mississippi and became one of the great singers and opera singers of the world." Right. I said, "If I'd have said yes, you might have asked me what my favorite aria was, and I couldn't have told you." She said, "Well, have you ever seen the opera?" I said, "Well, I saw La Boheme." She said, "Where?" I said, "The Met in New York." She said, "Didn't you like that? That's a wonderful opera." I said, "I couldn't understand one word they were saying. They didn't have subtitles." She said, "We need to give it another chance." She later became an artistic director of the Kennedy Center, and she and I actually became good friends. But it's just moments like that. I said, I love the Kennedy Center. And so when President Clinton was elected, I was asked if I wanted an appointment. I said yes to the Kennedy Center. And so Senator Daschle intervened on my behalf. By the way, President Clinton said, Cappy, I know Cappy, and he was very helpful to me, but, Hillary's going to have to approve this nomination.
Right.
So Tom calls Hillary. Tom calls me, says she's okay with it. So I got to be on the board of the Kennedy Center. There was three guys John Schreiber, Mark Krantz, and Murray Horowitz. Murray was very famous for being on NPR for many, many, many years. I think he still does spots from time to time. But they went to the White House, and Ann Stock was the White House Social Secretary, and they said, look, we'd like to do a comedy show here at the White House. And Ann Stock said, we're not being very funny this period of time. And they said, well, why? I said, well, we've got some scandals going on. Obviously, the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Yeah. But I'm going to the Kennedy Center and being in charge of institutional relations, which means dealing with the Congress for the Kennedy Center, because the Congress is very important to the Kennedy Center because they give a budget to us. They give funds to us to make sure the upkeep of the presidential, obviously, so Ann Stock went to the Kennedy Center and said, listen, I'm going to set up a meeting and you guys come over and present it to Larry Wilker, who was the president of the Kennedy Center. Larry had known that I had done a little stand-up comedy in college and had my radio program. He said, and we had a board meeting the next day. So I came in and he invited me. He said, look, would you like to come to this meeting? We're going to talk about this comedy show. And so we were sitting in Larry Wilker's office. It was Murray Horowitz, John Schreiber, Mark Krantz, and then Peter Kaminsky joined because Peter and Mark Krantz are very close friends. And then later Bob Kaminsky joined, but Peter was a writer, a comedy writer, had done a lot of stuff for the New York Times in the sports column, fishing and hunting. In food, he's written many cookbooks with famous authors. Bob had done some television work and comedy festivals in Canada, and so that was the group. Bob was not a part of that initial meeting, but Peter was. And so we're going around and said, okay, we'd like to start a kind of a comedy show here at the Kennedy Center. What should we name it? Somebody said, Will Rogers, Mark's, on and on and on. And I can't remember who it was. I think it was Murray Horowitz said, what about Mark Twain? He was really our very first stand-up comedian. And Twain, if you remember, and you may not remember because it's been obviously a long time ago, not as long ago as the Supreme Court in Arizona did in terms of that law, by the way. But it was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago.
Anyway, yeah. It was a long time ago. Anyway, so we said Twain had invested a lot of money in a printing press or a type press, and he took all of his monies that he made from Mark Twain, from Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and invested in this, and he lost all of his money and declared bankruptcy. Oh. And so he went across the United States in these small theaters, and he would tell stories and tell funny stories about the Congress, about everyday life. And he kind of really was our very first stand-up comedian. So we settled on Mark Twain. And so our very first, who should we honor? Well, one of the great, really, truly influential comedians and stand-up artists, maybe of all time, is Richard Pryor. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to write, we started to ask Richard Pryor if we could honor him for the very first Mark Twain Prize. We had Harry Belafonte, Whoopi Goldberg, Gene Wilder, and Chris Rock all lining up to honor Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor was controversial because that fire he had when he was, I think, doing crack cocaine or whatever. He had terrible MS, was in a wheelchair, literally clapped, and his hands would not come together. But this guy was truly one of the iconic comic geniuses of our time. And everyone that got up there, Harry Belafonte started it off by saying Mark Twain would have been so proud and pleased to have Richard Pryor be the first recipient of the Mark Twain Prize. And everyone did. Gene Wilder, Whoopi Goldberg, they all did. And then Chris Rock, who had just come off Saturday Night Live, he gets up there. By the way, I bought a third of the seats out in the concert hall at the Kennedy Center because it was a hard sell for Richard Pryor.
Really?
Which is shocking.
That's very surprising. Yeah.
Really surprising. And so we had a full deal. And I also invited the board of the Kennedy Center in the front, in the front orchestra area, because we had our board meeting the next day. And we always had the executive committee meeting before the board meeting. And one of the trustees was Jean Kennedy Smith, President John Kennedy's sister, who was ambassador to Ireland at the time. And so Chris Rock gets up there and he said, I've heard all this MFBS all night long about Mark Twain being so happy about Richard Pryor getting the first Mark Twain. That's the biggest bunch of BS, MFBS I've heard all MF night. He would have said, take my MF bag upstairs right now. Well, the concert hall went crazy. I mean, it was maybe one of the longest laughs like ever at the Kennedy Center. I don't think the F word and the N word had ever been said on the Kennedy Center stage, so that was a first. Okay. So then, we lost $100,000 that first year.
Right. I'm sure. Yeah. Okay.
So the next morning at the executive committee, I'm making a plea. Jim Johnson, who was chairman, said, Cappy, give us an update on the Mark Twain Prize. I said, well, we had new people come in, younger people come in. I think this is really a wonderful thing. And we were deciding whether to continue the Mark Twain Prize another year. And I said, even though we've lost some money this year, I think we can really build on it and really create something of great success. And there was two women that since became very, very close friends. Alma Powell, who was Colin Powell's wife, who was on the board, and Buffy Caferts, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. And they kind of spoke against it. They said, look, we just created the spring gala. We don't need another fundraiser. Mark Twain at that time was in the fall. And, I was tap dancing, trying to, doing my best, sucking up till my cheeks met. But Jean Kennedy Smith did not say one word. And so Jim said, let's to continue the Mark Twain Prize. And everybody, all those in favor, everybody raised their hand. Pretty much everybody raised their hand. All those opposed. Well, Jean Kennedy Smith was the only no vote. And so after the executive committee, Jim Johnson said, the chairman said, Cappy, I'm so sorry. I know you worked really hard on this, but Twain's dead. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, Cappy, the president's sister cannot be against it and still have it exist here at the Kennedy Center. I went, I guess you're right. I didn't really think about that. So I made a beeline to her on the way to the board meeting. And I said, Madam Ambassador, I said, you voted no. And I said, if you vote no, the Twain is dead. And I said, I worked really hard on this. Why did you vote no? She said, my brother would have been horrified at the N word and the F word said on the stage bearing his name. I think your brother would have been very pleased and happy with a big smile on his face about the laughter that was brought on the stage bearing his name. I said, it's a wonderful, he was all stood for humor. He was one of the great humorists and witty presidents we've ever had. And so then I started naming, Carl Reiner, Jonathan Winters. I said, you need to give me another chance, please. And she said, well, let me think about it. So we're going there. Jim Johnson, I see Ambassador Smith whisper to Jim Johnson. Jim Johnson calls on me, said, Cappy, congratulations about last night. We give us a report. I'm happy to say the executive committee has decided to do the Mark Twain Prize another year. And that second year, we honored Jonathan Winters, huge success. This year, we honored Kevin Hart after 25th anniversary, and we grossed $5 million. And so from a negative 100,000 to $5 million is a big, big swing. And all the money that is raised for the Mark Twain Prize goes to arts and education throughout the United States. K through 12 are not teaching arts education. They're not teaching the appreciation for art, music, comedy, etc. And so we hope that mitigates some of the issues that some of these schools have, not having the budget in order to do great arts education. So that's kind of how the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize started. And we've had really 25 great years. And so I'm very happy and very proud about that.
That sounds like an incredible story, and I'm glad it all came together. I'm sure it probably made the hair stand up on the back of her neck here in the Chris Rock stand-up. But I wanted to ask you about something a little bit more controversial that happened recently within the past few years. One of the nominees, or one of the recipients of the award, Bill Cosby, had his award rescinded after his sexual misconduct conviction. Tell me about the process with that. Was there any kickback on your end internally regarding the prize? How did that happen, and what was the feedback and the fallout after that was rescinded?
The irony of all of the Bill Cosby saga is that we had asked him 2 times, and he said, I didn't like the bad language that Chris Rock used for Richard Pryor. I mean, are you kidding me? Anyway, after he got convicted, we did not. He actually has 2 honors at the Kennedy Center. At the Kennedy Center Honors and also the Mark Twain Prize. He's one of the very few people, Steve Martin, Lorne Michaels, Billy Crystal, I'm going to leave Lily Tomlin. I'm going to leave somebody out, so I better stop now. But Bill Cosby was one of those people that got the Kennedy Center Honors and the Mark Twain Prize. We waited until after the trial and his guilty verdict, and then we rescinded the prize from took the away from him, and also took the Mark Twain Prize because it was not good, and obviously the Kennedy Center's got a great reputation and doesn't want to be associated with somebody like Bill Cosby.
Right. No, that makes sense. I wasn't sure if there was any kind of public feedback. I think you guys were pretty quick about that rescinding. And
we were very quick about it. We didn't get any, as far as I know, we didn't get any, press back at all. I mean, we just did not.
What's some of the criteria that goes into selecting? I know you mentioned that, a lot of really prestigious names in the comedy world, and most recently, Kevin Hart was the recipient. What's some of the criteria that goes into the selection of the recipient of the award?
5 words. Really, 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 really funny. They have to be, obviously they've had a very successful career in various aspects of comedy. For example, we honored Neil Simon. He was not a stand-up comedian, but he wrote some of the great comedies on Broadway and also in film. Most of them have been stand-up comedians. Obviously, one of the people that, besides Neil Simon, is Lorne Michaels, who may be one of the most important people in comedy in the last 50 years because his show, and by the way, I would include Jon Stewart in that as well. Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert came out of The Daily Show. But SNL has generated so many brilliant, Bill Murray, Steve Martin, Julia Dreyfus, Chris Rock, on and on and on. And so those, some of the criteria is that you've got to have influence people that have followed you. You've got to have done something extraordinary in film, television, like Tina Fey, for example, was the very first woman of SNL, and then she did 30 Rock, and she did Mean Girls. She's truly a remarkably, wonderfully funny, creative person. So you have got to have had a substantial career. We don't call it a lifetime honor because we're honoring people kind of in mid-career. We're saying these people we want to honor. And quite frankly, Adam, one of the reasons we started the Mark Twain Prize is so we could say thank you to people who bring joy to us and make us laugh and make us smile. We live in a world of consternation. We live in a world of crisis. This country is divided in every way. Humor can bring us together and does bring us together. And so we want to make sure that we honor someone every year and say thank you to bring us joy and laughter. So that is kind of that's the criteria. Your list, by the way, my list and your listeners' list probably will be the same as our list.
Right.
Some of the people that have not that we've not honored are people like Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David, Chris Rock. Mel Brooks turned us down 3 times. I'm very upset about that. I love the guy. One of the reasons I wanted to start the Mark Twain Prize is to meet Mel Brooks. I ended up meeting Mel Brooks. So, but he, for some reason, I do not know the answer to that. That he's not said yes. So
one of the names I do when I was looking at the list of the recipients, was Robin Williams. Has there ever been? I know
Yes.
that there was I know George Carlin received the award. Wasn't supposed to be posthumous, but ended up being posthumous. Unfortunately, he passed away before he received it. Is Robin Williams in consideration for the award at any point going forward? Is that something that you're going to be looking kind of towards?
First of all, we do not honor someone that is passed away.
I see. Okay.
Robin Williams, we asked 3 times. He definitely was at the top of our list. Mm-hmm. He always had a conflict. He was either doing a movie or had a stand-up tour or whatever. But and Robin came to our, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 Twains. He came for Whoopi Goldberg. He came for Billy Crystal. He came for Jonathan Winters. And by the way, he was one of the nicest, genuine, down-to-earth people like ever. And yes, he was a great ad-lib artist for sure. One of the funniest guys on the planet. But his ad-libs are sometimes practiced. But he was brilliant. He definitely deserves in the Hall of Fame for comedy. And we were, obviously very sad that we were unable to honor him. But we did ask him 2 or 3 times.
Now, you touched on it a little bit in the past when I was asking you here about the award and the creation of the award. You talked about how important it is to have a comedic release right now, especially in the times that we're living, right? We're in the middle of this redo of 2020, which I'm hoping is just for the election and not all the other crap that happened. But tell me why you think this award has resonated with so many people and why you feel it's become, one of the cornerstones of what we do in the arts and entertainment.
Thank you, Adam, for saying that. I believe that too. People like to laugh. People like to take their minds off of the drudgery of life and crisis and MSNBC versus Fox News. I mean, people are kind of, they're exhausted.
Yeah.
And, comedy lifts your spirit. Comedy and humor are very, very important to everyday life. I mean, I've unfortunately had the privilege of giving eulogies, and I always inject humor. Because in a time of grief, it's always very, very important, I believe, if you're giving a eulogy, to talk about funny things that has happened to the deceased, or the deceased and you have a funny moment, because it brings life to be real. Because, life is not all fun and games. Right. And so that's, I think, one of the important reasons that humor is so critically important. It brings people together. It takes your mind off the everyday crisis of not only your life, but the crisis around you. And I just think it's very, very important.
Now, I know that the book has been re-released in paperback, and I wanted to talk to you about the responses that you've gotten from the book. Like I said, it's an incredible book. If you haven't had a chance to go pick it up, please, after you listen to this episode, please go pick it up. It really is a funny, heartwarming, fantastic read. Tell me about the responses that you've gotten from the book overall and how it's made you feel.
Adam, it's been spectacular. I really am so grateful that people enjoy the book. I've had people call me and say, I laughed all the way through it. I had no idea you were this funny. I said, are you kidding? I didn't pay anybody to say that, by the way. I should.
I'll wait for my check in the mail too. For it's fine.
Sure, Adam. Do you take Bitcoin?
I do, actually. Yes, and actually Dogecoin too, which is it's a new currency. I don't know if you heard of it. Yeah.
I have not heard of that. I do like stocks with earnings, by the way,
Listen, anything that's going to earn me something, right? Anything that's going to take us off. Yep.
No, I've been very pleased with the response. I've given book talks, at the New Orleans Book Festival, the Texas Book Festival. I gave talks from coast to coast, and it's been very gratifying to find that people enjoy the book. And hopefully I tell funny stories that people enjoy reading, and there's a lot of self-effacing humor. Somebody said, you were too self-effacing. I know you're not that self-effacing in real life. I said, come on. Really?
It really is. It's a wonderful book. I really, like I said, and one final thing before we wrap up this conversation, because I could sit here and talk to you all day. This has been a wonderful chat here. I wanted you to tell me a little bit about the story, because it's in the book, about Bill Murray and the baseball uniform issue. Tell me more about that story, because I'm a big Bill Murray fan, and it's just classic vintage Murray, I feel like. So tell me more about what happened there.
It is, Adam. Bill Murray, I'm a big Bill Murray fan, too. The Kennedy Center wrote a letter to his lawyer. He does not have a PR agent. He does not have a publicist. I mean, a booker. He's got an 800 number and a lawyer.
Crazy.
And if you want him to be in a commercial, or a movie or whatever you want him to be in, you call his 800 number and leave a message. And if he likes it, he'll call you back. So we wrote a letter, or the president of Kennedy Center wrote a letter to his lawyer, and we didn't hear from him. We didn't hear from him a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So she called me and said, "Cappy, we got to move on. We cannot wait for Bill Murray." I said, "Well, I've got an idea. Give me a couple of days, and let me see if I can, contact him." So I had a very good friend who plays golf, spectacular golf, and he's an incredible, very successful guy, by the way. But I think he gave the tennis locker room at Stanford. But his name is Craig Johnson, and he played at the Pebble Beach AT&T Pro-Am, and he was paired with Bill Murray. And so he and Bill got to know each other. So I texted Craig. I said, "Hey, Craig, we can't get in touch with Bill Murray. Would like for him to take the Mark Twain Prize. Will you help me?" He said, "Yes, write one sentence or two." I said, "Bill, will you take the Kennedy Center Mark Twain Prize? Thanks, Cappy." 5 minutes later, Craig sends me back, he copies and pastes the text from Bill, and he says, "I guess so." I guess so. Anyway, so I said, "Craig, ask Bill to text me directly, because if I take all these honorees into the White House to meet the president and take him on a tour, his family, whoever, on a tour of the White House in the afternoon after we see the president, hopefully in the morning." So Bill calls me, and I said, "Bill, give me your Social Security number, your passport numbers, whatever, and anybody you want, your family members and whoever you want to join you on the White House tour that afternoon." So we go in, and before that day that I take Bill into the White House, the Mark Twain Prize weekend, the White House calls me and said, "Listen, would Bill consider doing a PSA for the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare, with the president?" So I said, "Let me ask." And so I texted Bill. Bill texted me back, "Sure, happy to do that, but no script, only ad lib." Okay. So Bill and I get in the Oval Office, or excuse me, I meet him we're at this we're staying at the Four Seasons, and I meet Bill in the lobby at the prescribed time when he's checking in. "Hey, come on up to my room." So he's got this spectacular suite, and he's got a Cub jacket on, and that was right before the Cubs actually won the World Series. And President Obama is a famous White Sox fan, not Cub fan. And so Bill looks to me. I'm in, suit, fancy tie. He said, "Should I put a suit on and a tie to go to the White House in the Oval Office?" And I said, "Bill, go look in the mirror. You're Bill Murray. You can wear whatever you want to wear." He said, "What about this Cub jacket?" I went, "Perfect." I said, "It'll irritate the president to no end, but perfect." So we get to the White House. We're in the cabinet room, waiting to go in to see the president. And this young kid comes in and says, "Mr. Murray, here's your script." And Bill looks at me and said, "Cappy, I said no script." And I said, "Tell the president no script. I know he's a great ad-libber, and I know Bill's a great ad-libber, and so we're going to do ad-libbing."
Yeah.
And this kid, I'm sure, was sweating bullets. He comes back in about 5 or 10 minutes later. He goes, "Oh, the president's okay with that." And I went, "I knew he would be." So we finally we go to the Oval Office, and he's wearing that Cub jacket. And President Obama said, "Gosh, you got some guts coming in here with that Cub jacket on, don't you?" And so all laughs all around. We have a photo op with a Mark Twain Prize statue as a heavy bronze statue of Mark Twain. And then we get to the PSA, and there's cameras all around filming everything. And so the president says to Bill, why don't we have a putting contest? And then Bill said, well, sure. And then Bill's a really good golfer. Obviously, the president is too. And the president's very, very competitive. Okay. I'm not saying Bill's not, but Bill's very competitive as well. So the president says, why don't we just have a putting contest and talk about the Affordable Health Care Act? So that was the setup.
I see.
So the president puts down a paper cup. And Bill says, I'm not putting in a paper cup. He says, well, why? He said, when you put the ball in, it doesn't go clink. I want a paper cup. So the president yells out, anybody got a glass cup in here? So they bring a glass in. And so Bill is the first up. Bill puts the ball in, clink, into the cup. The president putts, does not make it in.
Oh, man. They
do it 5 times. Bill gets every ball in. The president misses every single ball. It was $1 a hole. Okay. And so we're walking out of the Oval Office, and the president said, "Cappy, do you play golf?" I said, "Yeah, not very well, but sure, I play golf." He said, "Well, if you bet, you got to pay up your bets at the end of every game." I said, "Mr. President, I certainly know that." I said, "Well, I owe Bill $5. I know. You owe him $5. So he turned to his aide, the president does. He said, "Hey, you got $5? So he gives me. I said, "Mr. President, can I take a picture of this?" He said, "Of course not." Anyway, he said, "Listen, Eisenhower built a putting green outside the Oval Office. Why don't you and Bill go putt on the Eisenhower green? Bill, would you like to do that?" "Cappy, sure." So we take our putters out. We get on the Eisenhower green, and we got some great pictures. Actually, I've got a great picture of the book with Bill and me on the Eisenhower green, putting. But Bill is an incredibly wonderful person. He is kind. Everybody we saw in the White House I took him on a tour of the White House that afternoon, and he would talk to every single person, whether it be a Secret Service, a guard. He wanted to go to the kitchen. He talked to the waiters, to the sous chef, to the chef. I mean, he's really a wonderful individual. And so we that I believe that, we had the cast dinner, we call it the night before dinner now, at the Supreme Court. Mm. And we had Justice Sotomayor. You have to have, obviously, a Supreme Court justice to host you.
Right.
So we had the dinner at the Supreme Court, and Bill sat with Justice Sotomayor. My dinner partner, by the way, was Sigourney Weaver. And I'm getting up, and I'm emceeing the deal. And I go to Jimmy Kimmel because Jimmy's going to be really funny, and so I wanted to get it off the toast and the roast off funny. And so David Rubenstein, the chairman of the Kennedy Center, is sitting between David Letterman and Jimmy Kimmel. So as I'm introducing Jimmy Kimmel, I kind of look over at him, and Jimmy has asked David, obviously, "What's my name?"
Yeah.
He comes up and he goes, "Pappy, thank you so much for that introduction." Okay. So, and it got kind of a laugh, but not really. And so one of the things that I've learned for the last many, many, many years and decades is that if you say something to a comedian, you're going to have something back. You're going to get something back. And so Jimmy gets down, and I said, "Hey, Jimmy, it's Cappy, not Pappy. It's like a baseball cap."
Oh no!
So then I'm introducing Bill Hader, and I do, Stefan. This party has everything: a Supreme Court justice, 2 late night talk show host. Anyway, I did that. Bill Hader comes up and says, "Slappy, thank you so much." And every single person had Slappy, Nappy, Clappy. It's just no way. So I go back to my seat, and Sigourney Weaver says, "You're from Texas." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, do you hunt?" My husband is a big hunter, hunts all over the world. I said, "Well, Sigourney, I stopped hunting. I hunt quail and dove, but I really don't hunt anymore." She said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, I went bear hunting in British Columbia, and I shot this spectacular bear, and went up to it, and I looked at this magnificent animal, and I just said, what in the heck have I done? And the guide said, do you want a bearskin rug? I went, please, no, I do not want a bearskin rug. I came back to Dallas and joined the zoo board.
Wow.
Have not killed any fur-bearing animals since.
Yeah.
Anyway, I told her the story. She said, well, where's that rug? I said, it's in the attic. I said, I used to put it over my head and scare my kids with it. And they said, every time I'd go in, I'd go, and they go, Daddy, take the stupid bearskin rug off. Anyway, she said, well, if you're not, if you don't want it, I'd love to have it. So I sent her the bearskin rug. And so anyway.
Yeah.
There you go. That's Bill Murray. Bill Murray is one of the most wonderful guys ever. And he was nice enough to give me a blurb for my book. Yep. And so I appreciate that.
Hey, that is an amazing story. I hope to meet Bill Murray someday. It's on my bucket list. I hope to have one of those encounters where he takes a French fry from my plate and looks right at me and says, no one will ever believe you, because I can't think of a more Bill Murray thing to do. But
Adam, go to Charleston. He lives in Charleston.
Oh, does he really? I'll have to go out and I'll have to go and check it out there. But so Cappy McGarr, aka Flappy McGee, thank you so much for your time, sir. I appreciate you. Tell everybody where they can find the book and where they can keep up to date with you, and also where they can keep up to date with the Kennedy Center and the Mark Twain Prize.
Well, the Kennedy Center has a website, and the Mark Twain Prize is every spring, and we look forward to welcoming you to the Kennedy Center so we can laugh out loud to people who make us laugh. I'm off social media for whatever reason. It came too distracting. You can find the book, by the way, on Amazon or bookstores, but Amazon has my book, and I did an audio version of the hardback book, and it took me a week to do it. And Ken Burns wrote my foreword, and Ken actually dictated spoke his foreword, and awesome. That was very, very, very nice. So I was Daryl Roy. Do you have some time for one other quick story?
Of course.
You can edit it out.
Absolutely. No. I'll leave it in. Absolutely.
So back in the old days when I was at the University of Texas, I got to meet Darrell Royal, who was a very famous football coach at the University of Texas. And he and I would go to Willie Nelson concerts, and we just loved. And this was actually before Faces and Stages, before really became back into pop culture again. And so I get a job at Goldman Sachs in the training program in New York, and Earl Campbell's winning the Heisman Trophy. And we knew he was going to win because there's no second. And so they gave a dinner. They were giving a reception kind of dinner on Thursday before the Heisman. And Darrell Roy was there. And he was sitting on a couch, and I sat right next to him. And I said, Darrell, how you doing? He said, great. Now, he had retired from coaching the year before. I think it was Mac Brown was the new coach, if I remember correctly. But anyway, I said, how long are you in New York? He said, well, I'm leaving on Sunday. And I said, gosh, I didn't think you liked New York. He said, well, I'm going to Saturday Night Live. Willie Nelson is the musical guest. I said, wow. I'd give my left you-know-what to go see Willie Nelson on Saturday Night Live. He goes, you keep your left you-know-what. We're going to go. I'm taking you as my guest. So his wife, Edith, and another couple came up from Austin, and we went to dinner. Actually, we went. Darrell asked me to go to the rehearsal that Willie was doing at 30 Rock, and we went there. There was only 2 or 3 people in the auditorium or the stage, and Willie was smoking dope. And this is back in 1978,
right,
or 1977, 78. And I turned to the coach. I said, Coach, does it bother you that Willie's smoking dope? And he goes, nah, he's been doing it his whole life, and I just leave him alone. I said, well, have you ever smoked up? He said, oh, absolutely not. I wouldn't consider it. If he'd said yes, I probably said, do you have any? But I didn't. But anyway, we went to dinner that night early. You had to be at Saturday Night Live at 10, I think it was 10 o'clock or 10:15, because SNL goes live, as everybody knows, at 11:30.
Yep. And
so we get on the elevator, and John Travolta comes on. SNL Saturday Night Fever had just come out. And so it is spectacular. I mean, I just loved every second of it. They asked Coach Royal to be on stage when the credits, were going, and the coach said, "Hey, listen, we've been invited to the after party at Lone Star Cafe, 1 Fifth Avenue." And 1 Fifth Avenue, I can't remember if it's still there or not, but they had a huge armadillo with Texas flags everywhere, and that was where the after party was. Well, it was the original cast of SNL: Belushi, the Aykroyd, Lorraine Newman, on and on and on. And Willie played for about an hour. And Coach Roll and I were kind of on the front row suggesting songs or whatever. And I'm now recording this, right? I'm recording this story to my book. But I stopped reading the book at this moment. I just start telling the story. And Willie says, "Hey, listen, I got a new group I just found out. They've never appeared in public before. Please welcome the Blues Brothers." And so Aykroyd and Belushi get up there, and they got jeans on. They don't have their sunglasses on, and the band's behind. They sing "Soul Man," and it just, I mean, most of the cast had not heard it, and everybody goes crazy. And I can't remember who it was. They said, "We'll sing another song," and Belushi goes, "You, we only know one song." And they go, "Again, sing it again." So they sing "Soul Man" again. So the publisher, my publisher at Post Hill Press, Anthony, calls me and goes, "Cappy, thank you so much. Great job. We got to edit it out. You mispronounced, a lot of names and words." And I said, "Well, I'm not surprised. I got dyslexia." He said, "But you did say the F word." I said, No, I didn't." He said, No. You said it several times or many times. I said, "When?" He said, "Well, you're telling the SNL story." I said, I have to re-record that because I don't want my grandchildren to hear their grandfather say the F word. So I go back to the recording studio. I say, the F word or friggin' or whatever. But anyway, that was one of the really wonderful, spectacular moments. My wife we were engaged at the time, and she was in law school. And I called her right after we got back. I got back to the house my apartment rather in New York about 3:00 in the morning. She said, "What time is it?" I said, I don't know. She said, "It's 2:00 in the morning. Don't ever call me ever in the middle of the night." Well, okay, but did you see me on television? Did you see my television? Goodbye. Bam. Anyway,
that is amazing. I can't even imagine what that moment must have been like to see the Blues Brothers like in their initial performance. Like, that's crazy.
They had sweatshirts on and jeans. I mean, not their suits and small black ties and sunglasses.
That is an incredible story, and I'm glad you shared that with me. Thank you. I'm a big Belushi and Aykroyd fan, so hearing that is probably unbelievable. But Cappy, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today, talking to me about your book. Like we said, the book is called "The Man Who Made Mark Twain Famous." It is available now everywhere you get your books. The audiobook is available, and the paperback is released as well. Please go pick it up. Cappy McGarr, thank you so much for your time, sir. I look forward to having you back on the show sometime soon.
Adam, thank you so much. I very much appreciated it.
Foundation Radio is hosted, recorded, and produced by Adam Barnard. Additional narration and production is provided by the executive voice, Sam Krepps. Our mixing and engineering was done by Carl Pannell. Our intro and outro music is performed by Dumb Ugly. Additional musical accompaniment is performed and produced by Enrichment. Our cover art photography was done by Dylan Eddinger. Follow Adam on Instagram and Twitter, or X or whatever, at This Is Goober, and follow the show on Twitter, again, not calling it X, at FND Radio Pod. Find the entire show archive at foundationradio.net. This has been a Butts Carlton Media production, Butts Carlton, proprietor.
That doesn't work for me, brother. Peace, Carl!